In a world of gleaming tech campuses and prestigious engineering awards, Elijah Boone delivered packages. Not ideas, not innovations, just boxes. No one at Virex Dynamics noticed his careful eyes studying their failing propulsion prototype. The same one he'd designed years ago at MIT before it was stolen from him. When their critical test failed again, a frustrated engineer sneered, "Then you do it, genius." It was meant as dismissal. They didn't see his slight smile as he walked away. They didn't know that tonight, after his shift ended, he would return. And tomorrow, when their prototype mysteriously worked for the first time, no one would suspect the delivery guy. Until Elijah Boone decided it was finally time to reclaim what was his. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the loading dock as Elijah Boone organized the packages in his delivery van. At 35, he moved with the efficient precision that came from years of memorizing routes and addresses. His dark brown skin glistened with a thin layer of sweat despite the early hour. Summer in this city never gave anyone a break. "You've got a new stop today, Elijah," his supervisor called, waving a clipboard. "Virex Dynamics. They need these specialized components ASAP." Elijah nodded, mentally recalculating his route. "Virex? That's the aerospace place on the north side, right?" "Yeah, and these packages are priority. Some big government contract stuff." The supervisor handed him the clipboard. "They're expecting you by 11. Elijah checked his watch. He'd make it with time to spare, just like always. Being punctual wasn't just part of his job, it was a point of pride. In all his years as a delivery driver, he'd earned a reputation for reliability that even the most demanding clients appreciated. "No problem," he said, signing the form and handing it back. "I'll get it there." As he pulled out of the depot, Elijah allowed himself a small smile. Most people saw him as just another delivery guy, someone whose face blended into the background of their day. What they didn't see was the man who had once walked the halls of MIT as one of their brightest engineering students, whose mind still dissected and rebuilt the world around him out of habit. But that was a lifetime ago, before everything fell apart. The drive to Virex took him through the changing landscape of the city, from the industrial zone where his depot sat, through neighborhoods that grew progressively more affluent, until he reached the gleaming glass and steel complex that housed some of the most advanced aerospace technology in the country. Elijah parked in the delivery zone and approached the security desk, where a guard eyed him with practiced indifference. "Delivery for R&D, specialized components," Elijah said, handing over his ID. The guard checked his clipboard, then nodded. "Someone will escort you. Wait here." 5 minutes later, a harried-looking woman in a lab coat appeared. Her ID badge identified her as Dr. Karen Morris. "Finally," she muttered, signing for the packages. "Follow me. These need to go directly to Test Lab B." Elijah followed Dr. Morris through a maze of corridors, passing rooms filled with engineers hunched over computers or gathered around whiteboards covered in complex equations. The tension in the air was palpable, the kind that came from looming deadlines and failing projects. "Set them over there," Dr. Morris instructed when they reached the lab, pointing to a workbench. Elijah carefully placed the packages down and stepped back, taking in the enormous space around him. The lab hummed with activity as engineers moved between workstations, their faces tight with stress. At the center of the room stood what appeared to be a propulsion system prototype, surrounded by diagnostic equipment and multiple computer terminals. As he turned to leave, Elijah's gaze fell on a blueprint spread across a nearby table. Something about the design caught his eye. A familiar configuration, but with an obvious flaw in the wiring layout. He paused, studying it. A young engineer noticed his interest and smirked. "You know what that is?" he asked, his tone suggesting the answer was obviously no. Elijah hesitated, then quietly said, "The power routing to the secondary chamber is misaligned. It'll create feedback in the system." The engineer blinked in surprise, then laughed. "Then you do it, genius," he called out, drawing the attention of several colleagues who joined in the laughter. Elijah simply smiled and shrugged, turning to leave. but not before he noticed a young woman watching him with curious eyes instead of laughter. Her name badge read, Mira Talib, Junior Engineer. "Thanks for the delivery," she said quietly, her expression thoughtful. Elijah nodded and made his way back to the entrance, the sounds of the lab fading behind him. As he drove away from Virex, the familiar weight of his past settled back onto his shoulders. How many times had he been dismissed, underestimated, overlooked? Too many to count. Meanwhile, in a conference room several floors above the test lab, Augustus Weller paced in front of a group of nervous executives. At 55, Weller carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to power. His tailored suit and perfectly styled silver hair completed the image of corporate success. "Our timeline is collapsing," he snapped, pointing to a chart on the wall screen. "If we don't have a stable prototype by next week, we lose the contract. Do you understand what that means? $900 million gone. And more importantly, our reputation in the industry will be destroyed." The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Sir," one of them ventured, "the engineering team is working around the clock, but the propulsion system keeps failing at the same point. Dr. Haldane believes—" "I don't want excuses," Weller interrupted. "I want solutions. Make it happen. Or start updating your resumes." As the meeting dispersed, none of them noticed Mira Talib slipping into the security office on her floor. She approached the guard on duty, a friendly older man who had always been kind to her. "Hey, Jim, can I check something on the security footage from Test Lab B? I think someone might have tampered with my workstation." Jim nodded sympathetically. "Sure thing, Mira. What time?" "Around 11 this morning, when the delivery arrived." Jim pulled up the footage, and Mira watched as Elijah entered the lab with Dr. Morris. She studied his reaction to the blueprint, the way his eyes narrowed slightly, the confident way he pointed out the flaw. This was not the behavior of someone guessing. This was expertise. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, Mira sat at her computer, digging through public records. It took hours, but finally, she found what she was looking for, a newspaper article from 8 years ago about promising engineering students at MIT. And there he was, younger but unmistakable. Elijah Boone, described as brilliantly innovative, with unprecedented insight into propulsion technology. What happened to him? And why was he delivering packages to Virex instead of designing them? The next morning, Elijah returned with another delivery for Virex. This time, the atmosphere in the lab was even more tense. As he set down the packages, a tall, distinguished man with silver-streaked hair approached. "You're the delivery person? Where's the invoice?" His tone was brusque, dismissive. "Right here, Dr. Haldane," Elijah replied, reading the name from the man's badge. Dr. Haldane raised an eyebrow at Elijah's calm competence. "You seem to be spending a lot of time looking around our lab," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Fascinating, is it?" Several engineers paused their work to watch. "Just doing my job, sir," Elijah replied evenly. "Well, unless your job includes advanced propulsion engineering, I suggest you do it more quickly," Haldane said with a smirk. A few engineers chuckled. One called out, "Maybe he can fix our prototype," generating more laughter. "Then you do it." "Genius," another echoed from the previous day to general amusement. Elijah simply nodded, signed the delivery confirmation, and left. But that phrase echoed in his mind all day. "Then you do it, genius." The same words he'd heard so many times before, in different contexts but always with the same underlying message. You don't belong here. That evening, after his shift ended, Elijah found himself driving back toward Virex. He told himself he was just returning a signed invoice that had gotten mixed up in his van, a legitimate reason to go back. But deep down, he knew it was something more. The night security guard was relaxed, barely glancing at the paperwork Elijah claimed to be returning. He made his way to Test Lab B, now dimly lit and empty. The prototype sat in the center, dormant but imposing. Elijah approached it slowly, studying its construction. 8 years away from engineering hadn't dulled his understanding of the principles at work. He could see immediately where the problem lay, not just the wiring issue he'd noticed in the blueprint, but a more fundamental flaw in the power distribution system. Without allowing himself to think too deeply about what he was doing, Elijah opened a nearby toolkit and made a small but crucial adjustment to the wiring in the propulsion chamber. Nothing major, just enough to prevent the feedback loop that was causing system failures. Then he left, slipping out as quietly as he had entered, telling himself it didn't matter if his fix worked or not. He was just a delivery guy, after all. Thus, next morning, Virex Dynamics erupted in confused excitement. For the first time in months, the prototype had run for a full diagnostic cycle without exploding or shutting down. "It's stable!" an engineer shouted, staring at the readings in disbelief. "How is this possible?" Dr. Haldane pushed through the crowd, his face a mixture of shock and suspicion. "What did you change? Who authorized modifications?" The engineers looked at each other in confusion. No one had made any significant changes overnight. At least, no one was admitting to it. In the back of the crowd, Mira Talib watched their reactions, a slow smile spreading across her face. She already knew what had happened, or rather, who had happened. The news about the suddenly stabilized prototype spread through Virex like wildfire. Engineers huddled in small groups, theorizing about what might have changed. In the main conference room, Augustus Weller demanded answers. "I don't care how it happened," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I want to know why it took you geniuses months to solve a problem that apparently fixed itself overnight." Dr. Haldane's face reddened. "Sir, we're analyzing the system. Now." Something was altered in the wiring configuration, but it shouldn't have made this much difference. There must be another factor we haven't identified yet. "Find it," Weller ordered, "and find out who made the change without authorization." Outside in the parking lot, Mira waited by the delivery entrance. When Elijah's van pulled up, she approached him before he could even grab his packages. "It worked," she said without preamble. "The prototype ran a full cycle this morning." Elijah's expression remained neutral as he reached into the back of the van. "That's good news for Virex, I guess." "How did you know?" Mira pressed. "About the wiring fault. You've never even seen the full system." "Just an educated guess," Elijah replied, hefting a box. "Some configurations are pretty standard." "Standard? If you've studied advanced propulsion engineering," Mira countered. "MIT, right? Class of 2016? Elijah froze for a moment, then continued toward the entrance. "That was a long time ago. I'm just here to deliver these components." "Why did you leave?" Mira asked, falling into step beside him. "The article I found called you brilliant." "Articles exaggerate," Elijah said flatly, "and sometimes brilliance isn't enough." Before Mira could respond, they reached the security desk, and the conversation ended. But as Elijah made his delivery and left the building, his mind drifted back to the past he tried so hard to forget. He remembered his mother's face when he'd called to tell her he was dropping out of MIT, the disappointment in her eyes, quickly, masked by understanding. "Do what you need to do, baby," she'd said. "Just don't let them steal your fire." But they had stolen it, or rather, he'd given it away the day he walked out of Professor Lawrence's office after discovering the man had patented Elijah's propulsion concept under his own name. When Elijah had confronted him, Lawrence had simply smiled and said, "It's your word against mine. Who do you think they'll believe?" 3 months later, his mother died during a surgery that had been delayed because the hospital prioritized a wealthy donor with a less urgent condition. 2 blows that had taught Elijah the same lesson. In this world, power and privilege always won. And then, a year after that, he'd seen Lawrence's name in the news for selling several patents to a new aerospace company, Virex Dynamics. The irony wasn't lost on Elijah now as he drove away from the very building where his stolen ideas were failing without him. Inside Virex, tensions were escalating as engineers began pointing fingers at each other over the prototype's earlier failures. Unknown to most of them, one senior engineer named Victor Reese had been subtly sabotaging earlier test runs to make the team led by his rival, Dr. Haldane, look incompetent. With Weller's attention now focused on finding who had fixed the system, Reese grew nervous that his sabotage might be discovered. Mira, meanwhile, found herself increasingly torn between loyalty to her team and her growing suspicion that Elijah, Boone knew far more than he was letting on. That evening, she waited by his van again. "I have a proposition," she said when he emerged from the building. "Meet me after hours. I want to show you something." Elijah shook his head. "I don't think that's a good idea." "They're going to run another test tomorrow," Mira persisted. "They've fixed what they think was the problem, but it's going to fail. Again, isn't it?" Elijah's silence was answer enough. "You could help," she urged. "Not for them, for the project itself." "Why would I care about Virex's project?" Elijah asked, his voice hardening. "Because I think you care about the work," Mira replied simply, "despite everything." Elijah drove home in silence, Mira's words echoing in his mind. The next day, he arranged his route so he'd be at Virex during their scheduled test run. From the loading dock, he watched through a window as engineers gathered around the prototype. Even from a distance, he could see they'd reverted the wiring to the original configuration, believing they'd fixed the actual problem elsewhere. When the system failed spectacularly, sending engineers scrambling for fire extinguishers, Elijah simply shook his head and returned to his van. That evening, his phone rang with an unknown number. "It's Mira Talib," the voice said when he answered. "I got your number from the delivery log." Before he could respond, she continued. "They made it worse. 2 engineers have minor burns. Will you just look at the full schematics? Unofficially?" After a long pause, Elijah agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near the Virex campus. The meeting was brief. Mira brought a tablet with secure access to the project files. Elijah spent an hour reviewing them, his fingers occasionally tracing patterns on the screen as he identified issues. "The wiring was just one problem," he finally said. "The real issue is in the algorithm that controls the thrust balance. It's creating an oscillation that builds until the system fails." Mira stared at him. "How can you tell that just from looking at the schematics?" Elijah smiled faintly. "Because I designed a similar system 8 years ago. The principles haven't changed, just the application." The next day, Mira submitted an anonymous internal note pointing out the algorithm flaw. When the engineering team implemented the fix and the prototype ran successfully again, Dr. Haldane took full credit for identifying the issue. "My team conducted a thorough analysis and isolated the problem," he announced proudly in Weller's office. "We should be back on schedule now." Weller was pleased enough to promote Haldane to Senior Director of Engineering on the spot, with a substantial raise. News of the promotion spread quickly through the company, reaching Mira as she was heading to the parking lot. Furious, she drove straight to Elijah's apartment complex, having looked up his address from his delivery details. "They took credit for your fix," she said when he opened the door, surprised to see her. "Haldane got a promotion out of it." Elijah leaned against the doorframe. "Of course he did. That's how the world works, Mira." "It doesn't have to be," she insisted. "If you don't speak up, they'll keep stealing everything. Again." Elijah's eyes narrowed at her last word. "What do you mean, again?" Mira hesitated, then said, "I did more research on you. Your propulsion model from MIT, the one that mysteriously disappeared from your academic record, but showed up in a patent under Professor Lawrence's name a year later." She paused. "A patent that Virex acquired 5 years ago." Elijah stepped back, his face hardening. "You should go." "The prototype we're working on," Mira pressed on. "It's based on your original design. They've modified it, but the core concept is yours. Don't you want credit for what's yours?" "Credit?" Elijah laughed bitterly. "What good did credit ever do for people like me? I watched my mother die because some rich white guy's gallbladder was more important than her heart. I had my work stolen by a professor who knew the system would protect him. So no, Mira, I don't want credit. I just want to be left alone." "Then why did you fix the prototype?" Mira challenged. "Why not just let it fail?" Elijah had no answer for that. After Mira left, he sat on his small balcony, staring at the city lights and remembering a time when he'd believed his ideas could change the world, before he learned that the world didn't want to be changed by someone like him. The next morning, Instead of his usual route, Elijah drove to a small house in the suburbs. Professor Lawrence opened the door, older now but still carrying himself with the same arrogant confidence Elijah remembered. "Elijah Boone," Lawrence said, surprised. "It's been what, 7 years?" "8, Elijah corrected. "You're consulting for Virex now." Lawrence's eyes narrowed. "How did you know that?" "Because they're struggling with my propulsion system," Elijah replied calmly. "The one you stole." Lawrence glanced around nervously, then stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "That's a serious accusation. The patent courts didn't think so." "Because you filed while I was dealing with my mother's death," Elijah said. "Very convenient timing." "What do you want, Elijah?" "Money. Because I should warn you, I have excellent lawyers." Elijah simply studied the man who had derailed his life. "I just wanted to see your face, to remind myself why I left." He turned to go, then paused. "They'll never make it work properly, you know. Not without understanding the core principles I never wrote down." Back at Virex, Mira was conducting her own investigation. Digging through the company's patent archives, she discovered something startling. The original patent they'd acquired from Lawrence included sketches of a propulsion model virtually identical to what Elijah had described building at MIT. Meanwhile, Augustus Weller was hearing whispers about the delivery driver who'd supposedly spotted the flaw. Initially dismissive, his interest was piqued when he learned the same driver had attended MIT around the time they'd acquired the Lawrence patents. He instructed security to monitor Elijah's movements during deliveries. That afternoon, when Elijah arrived with his usual packages, he was met by Mira in the parking lot. "I found the patent," she said quietly. "It's your design. They stole it and now they can't make it work because they don't truly understand it." Elijah loaded his hand truck with boxes. "And what exactly do you expect me to do about it?" "Help me rebuild it the right way," Mira urged. "Off the books. Prove it was yours all along." Elijah shook his head. "I'm not interested in stealing ideas from dead dreams, Mira. That part of my life is over." Before she could argue further, alarms began blaring from inside the building. Red emergency lights flashed as employees evacuated. Over the PA system, a voice announced, "Code red in Test Lab B. This is not a drill. All personnel evacuate immediately." Despite himself, Elijah ran toward the building. Inside, chaos reigned as people streamed toward exits. Against the flow, he made his way to Test Lab B, where smoke billowed from the prototype. A small fire had broken out around the power supply, and the emergency sprinklers were failing to activate. Without hesitation, Elijah grabbed a fire extinguisher and fought his way to the central control panel. The heat was intense, but he managed to reach the emergency shutdown switch, cutting power to the entire system before the fire could reach the fuel cells. Security cameras captured it all, the delivery driver running toward danger, while engineers fled. His confident movements as he navigated the failing system, the moment he prevented what could have been a catastrophic explosion. Hours later, as the cleanup began, Augustus Weller stood before news cameras outside the Virex building. Thanks to the quick response of our senior engineering team, what could have been a serious incident was contained with minimal damage, he announced smoothly. This type of setback is common in cutting-edge research, and we remain on schedule, with our contractual obligations. Not a word about the delivery driver who had saved the day. But inside Virex, the story was different. Security footage of Elijah's actions circulated among employees, raising questions about who this man really was and why he knew exactly how to shut down their complex system. Mira, watching the footage in her apartment that night, made a decision. She carefully edited a clip to remove any identifying features of the prototype, then uploaded it to an anonymous tech forum with the caption, "Delivery driver saves aerospace prototype while engineers run. Who is this guy, and why does he know more than the experts?" By morning, the clip had been picked up by several tech blogs, and speculation was building. Somewhere in the midst of the online buzz, the name Elijah Boone began to surface, along with fragments of his MIT history. As Elijah started his delivery route, his phone buzzed with an email from an unfamiliar address. Tech Fusion Industries, a rival company to Virex, offering him a discreet position as a consultant. He deleted it immediately, but a seed of suspicion took root. How had they found him so quickly? And why now? When he arrived at Virex that day, the atmosphere had changed. Engineers eyed him with curiosity rather than dismissal. Dr. Haldane avoided him entirely, and Augustus Weller watched from his office window as Elijah's van pulled into the loading dock. After his delivery, Mira was waiting for him in the parking lot again. "They're talking about you inside," she said. "The video's everywhere." "You leaked it," Elijah stated, not a question. "Only a redacted version," Mira defended. "But yes, people deserve to know the truth." Elijah looked tired. "And what truth is that? That a delivery guy got lucky? That the most brilliant mind behind this technology isn't wearing a lab coat or sitting in the executive suite?" Mira countered. "Look, I have an idea. Help me solve the full system failure once and for all, but we'll do it off the grid. No official record, no way for them to take credit." "Why would you risk your career for this?" Elijah asked. Mira's expression grew serious. "Because my father was an engineer too. An immigrant with brilliant ideas who was pushed aside and forgotten. I watched what it did to him." She paused. "Some things are more important than a paycheck." Elijah studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "All right. But we do this my way. And when it's done, I walk away for good." As Elijah drove away from Virex, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled back into a world he'd fought so hard to leave behind. Yet something had awakened in him. That spark of creation he'd thought long extinguished. For the first time in years, he felt the familiar excitement of solving a complex problem, of making something work that others couldn't. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running from who he really was. The campus of MIT looked exactly as Elijah remembered: imposing brick buildings, students hurrying between classes, the constant buzz of brilliant minds at work. He sat in his parked van across the street watching. 8 years since he'd left, yet the wound still felt fresh. He'd told himself he needed to see this place again, to make peace with it before diving back into the world of engineering with Mira. But now that he was here, all he felt was the familiar ache of what might have been. His phone buzzed with a text from Mira. "Where are you? Thought we were meeting at 7. Elijah sighed and typed back, "Got held up. Be there soon." He started the engine but couldn't resist one last look at the engineering building where he'd once spent countless hours bringing his ideas to life. Professor Lawrence's office had been on the 3rd floor, corner window. The same office where Lawrence had smiled at him with cold eyes and said, "You're a brilliant young man, Elijah. But brilliance without connections is just wasted potential." Now Lawrence was a consultant for Virex, helping them struggle with the very technology he'd stolen from Elijah. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so painful. Elijah finally pulled away from the curb and headed toward the small workshop Mira had arranged for their off-the-books project. As he drove, his mind drifted to the day before, when he'd confronted Lawrence at his home. The professor had aged, but his arrogance remained intact. He'd been shocked to see Elijah, not remorseful, just surprised, as if encountering a ghost from a past he'd assumed was safely buried. "They'll never make it work properly," Elijah had told him. What he hadn't said was that part of him, a part he wasn't proud of, took satisfaction in that fact. Let them struggle with stolen blueprints they couldn't fully understand. Let them feel the frustration of knowing something should work but didn't. But another part of him, the part that had driven him to MIT in the first place, couldn't bear to see good engineering fail. That was the part Mira had somehow awakened. The workshop was in an industrial area, a small rented space filled with basic equipment. Nothing like the state-of-the-art labs at Virex, but it would serve their purpose. Mira was already there. When he arrived, hunched over a laptop. "Sorry I'm late," Elijah said, setting down his backpack. Mira looked up, her eyes bright with excitement. "You need to see this. I found something." She turned her laptop to show him a series of documents. Old, design specifications, patent applications, and buried in the data, Elijah's original MIT project submission. "How did you get this?" he asked, stunned. "These files should have been deleted years ago." MIT maintains archives of all student projects. They don't delete anything, even when the professors try to bury it. She pointed to a date stamp on the file. "Your submission predates Lawrence's patent by 8 months. Elijah stared at the screen, seeing his younger self in the detailed notes and innovative approaches. "It doesn't matter. The patent office already ruled on this." "Based on incomplete evidence," Mira countered. "But that's not even the most interesting part." She clicked to another document, Virex's current propulsion specifications. "Look familiar?" Elijah scanned the document, his jaw tightening. The design wasn't just similar to his, it was his, with only superficial modifications. The core concepts, the innovative approach to thrust modulation, even some of the original parameter values, all lifted directly from his work. "They're using my exact design," he said quietly. "But they're implementing it wrong. The phase alignment is completely off." "Because they don't understand the underlying principles," Mira finished for him. "They have the blueprint but not the vision." For a moment Elijah was silent, processing the implications. Then he shook his head. "I don't want anything to do with stealing ideas from dead dreams." Mira's expression softened. "Your dreams aren't dead, Elijah. They were stolen. There's a difference." Before he could respond, her phone chimed with a notification. "There's another test scheduled for tomorrow morning," she said, checking the message. "Haldane thinks they've fixed the code issues." "Have they?" "Not even close." Elijah sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "Let me see the full specs. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." As they worked late into the night, analyzing Virex's implementation of his design, Elijah felt a strange mix of emotions: anger at seeing his stolen work, satisfaction at their failure to make it function, and an undeniable excitement at engaging with complex engineering problems again. The next day, as predicted, Virex's test failed spectacularly. The prototype didn't just malfunction, it ruptured, sending a piece of metal through a safety shield and starting a small fire. No one was seriously injured, but the lab had to be evacuated. Elijah, making his regular delivery shortly after, watched the aftermath from the loading dock, engineers arguing, maintenance crews cleaning up, and Augustus Weller storming through the hallways, his face dark with rage. When Elijah entered the building with his packages, he was surprised to find himself in the middle of the evacuation. Without thinking, he set down his delivery and moved against the flow of people, toward the source of the commotion. The sprinkler system had activated, soaking everything, but electrical components were still sparking dangerously near the fuel cells. With calm efficiency, Elijah navigated to the emergency shutdown panel and cut power to the prototype's energy core, preventing what could have been a much more serious explosion. He worked quickly and methodically, as if he'd designed the system himself, which, in a way, he had. Security cameras captured it all. By evening, footage of the delivery hero was circulating among Virex employees, though the official company statement made no mention of Elijah, crediting the quick action of our senior engineering team for averting disaster. Unknown to most, however, Augustus Weller was reviewing the security footage in his office, his expression thoughtful as he watched Elijah expertly shut down systems that most delivery drivers shouldn't even recognize, let alone know how to operate. "Find out everything about him," Weller instructed his head of security. "Education, work history, everything." That night, Mira secretly uploaded a carefully edited clip of Elijah's actions to an engineering forum. By morning, it had spread to tech blogs and social media, with commenters speculating about the identity of the mysterious delivery guy, who seemed to understand complex aerospace technology better than the engineers who built it. As public interest grew, a tech journalist began connecting dots between Elijah, MIT, Professor Lawrence, and Virex's patents. The story was building momentum online, threatening to expose not just Elijah's past, but the questionable origins of Virex's prized technology. Meanwhile, Elijah received a surprising email, a job offer from Tech Fusion Industries, a direct competitor to Virex, offering him a substantial salary for a consulting position. The timing was suspicious. How had they found him so quickly? And why the sudden interest? When he showed the email to Mira during their evening workshop session, her eyes narrowed. "They're trying to buy your silence," she said. "Someone at Virex must have leaked information about you." Elijah declined the offer with a brief, polite email. He had no interest in corporate games. He just wanted to set things right and then return to his quiet life, or so he told himself. But as he and Mira continued working on their own version of the propulsion system, using scrapped parts and Elijah's original designs, he found himself more engaged and alive than he'd been in years. The familiar joy of solving complex problems, of creating something innovative and elegant, reminded him of who he'd once been, who he still was, beneath the layers of disappointment and resignation. Their secret project progressed rapidly. Working nights and weekends in the small workshop, they assembled a functioning small-scale model of Elijah's original design. Unlike Virex's struggling prototype, theirs worked flawlessly from the first test, achieving stable thrust modulation that the corporate engineers had failed to master for months. "It's beautiful," Mira whispered as they watched their creation hover silently above the test platform, balancing perfectly on controlled jets of energy. For the first time in years, Elijah allowed himself a genuine smile of pride. "It is, isn't it?" As they celebrated their success, Mira opened up about her own past. "My father was an engineer in India, brilliant, innovative, but without the right background or connections. He immigrated here believing America would recognize talent regardless of where it came from." She paused, her expression growing distant. "He ended up maintaining other people's machines instead of building his own. I watched him slowly give up on his dreams. That's why I became an engineer, to finish what he started." Elijah nodded, understanding the weight of inherited dreams. "Is he still alive?" "Yes. He works as a maintenance supervisor for a manufacturing plant, still fixing other people's creations." She looked at Elijah. "That's why I couldn't just let this go. When I saw you, someone so brilliant being dismissed just like my father, I had to do something." Their moment of connection was interrupted by an alert on Mira's phone. She frowned as she read the message. "Someone tried to access our lab recordings from last week. The files have been corrupted." "Accident or sabotage?" Elijah asked. "Given everything that's happened, I'd bet on sabotage." She looked up worried. "Haldane has been acting strange lately, watching me, asking questions about my after-hours activities." The next morning, Elijah made his usual delivery to Virex, but something felt different. Security seemed tighter, and conversations stopped when he entered rooms. In Test Lab B, he noticed Dr. Haldane watching him with open suspicion. "Mr. Boone," Haldane called as Elijah was leaving. "A word?" Elijah paused, his expression neutral. "Yes, Dr. Haldane?" "You seem very interested in our work here," Haldane said, his tone falsely casual. "Always looking around, asking questions." "Just doing my job," Elijah replied evenly. "Delivering packages, where they need to go." "Of course," Haldane smiled coldly. "It's just that some of our team members have noticed you taking a particular interest in our prototype. Quite knowledgeable for a delivery person." The pause before delivery person carried all the contempt Haldane couldn't quite hide. "I read a lot," Elijah said simply. "I'm sure you do." Haldane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, don't let me keep you from your reading." As Elijah left the building, he couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. His suspicions were confirmed that evening when he noticed a dark sedan following him from Virex to his apartment complex. Corporate surveillance. A sign that Weller was taking him seriously as a potential threat. The realization should have worried him, but instead, Elijah felt a strange satisfaction. For the first time in 8 years, the people who had dismissed him were finally paying attention. That night, rather than meeting at their workshop, Elijah and Mira connected via an encrypted messaging app. "They're on to us," Mira typed. "Someone sabotaged our equipment today. Everything's fried." Elijah wasn't surprised. Do they know about the working model? I don't think so. I moved it to my apartment last night as a precaution. Smart. We need to be careful. They're watching me too. Mira's next message was unexpected. I think we should go public. Show what we've built. Prove it's your design. Elijah hesitated. Going public meant exposing himself to exactly the kind of attention and conflict he'd spent years avoiding. But staying silent meant allowing Virex to continue profiting from his stolen work, and worse, implementing it poorly. Before he could reply, Mira sent another message. I managed to access Virex's central server today. Elijah, there's something you need to see. It's not just about the patent. What do you mean? Financial records, shell companies, offshore accounts. Augustus Weller didn't just acquire Lawrence's patent. He orchestrated the whole thing. There are payments to Lawrence dating back to when you were still his student. The implication hit Elijah like a physical blow. This wasn't just opportunistic theft after he'd left MIT. This was planned, Weller and Lawrence working together, to steal his work from the beginning. Send me everything, he typed back, his hand steady despite the anger building inside him. As Mira transferred the files, neither of them realized that her access to the server had not gone unnoticed. Ian Parker, a junior engineer on Mira's team who secretly reported to Augustus Weller, had installed spyware on her work computer. While he hadn't captured the files she'd taken, he knew she had accessed restricted financial records. The next morning, Ian met with Weller in his private office. She's definitely working with the delivery driver, Ian reported. And she's accessed your private financial records. Weller's expression darkened. What exactly did she see? I can't be certain, but she was in the Lawrence payment folders. Weller leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. This is becoming a problem. Should I have security detain her? Ian asked. No, Weller decided. That would only confirm her suspicions and create a scene. We need to handle this delicately. He looked at Ian. Keep watching her. Find out what she's planning with Boone. Meanwhile, Mira's leak of Elijah's heroic actions during the lab fire had gone viral. Tech forums were buzzing with speculation about the mysterious delivery driver who seemed to know more about aerospace engineering than Virex's own team. News outlets had picked up the story, running headlines like, Delivery Hero Saves $1 Million, Prototype and Who is Virex's Mystery Savior? The public pressure was building. People wanted to know who Elijah was and why a delivery driver could understand complex systems that baffled trained engineers. The story touched on themes of overlooked talent and institutional bias that resonated with many readers. Elijah, however, remained focused on the documents Mira had sent. They painted a damning picture. Augustus Weller had specifically targeted Elijah's work years ago using Lawrence as his inside man. The payments, the stolen patent, the shell companies, all part of a carefully orchestrated plan to acquire innovative technology without paying its true creator. And now, years later, they couldn't make it work properly because they'd never fully understood the principles behind it. The irony might have been satisfying if it weren't so infuriating. The abandoned research annex at the edge of Virex's campus had been scheduled for demolition months ago, but budget cuts had left it standing, empty, forgotten, and perfect for Mira and Elijah's clandestine work. They'd moved their equipment there after the sabotage at their workshop, figuring the last place anyone would look for them was on Virex property itself. Using their own space against them feels appropriate, Mira said, as she calibrated their small prototype, now rebuilt and improved after the sabotage. Elijah nodded, focused on the schematics displayed on his tablet. The symmetry is satisfying. They'd been working after hours for 2 weeks, refining their model while gathering evidence of Weller's conspiracy to steal Elijah's original work. The more they uncovered, the more extensive the deception appeared to be. Your design wasn't just stolen, Mira said, looking up from her work. It was the foundation of Virex's entire propulsion division. Without it, they wouldn't have secured their initial government contracts. And now they can't deliver what they promised, Elijah replied, because they don't understand how it's supposed to work. As they continued their secret lab sessions, a gradual shift occurred between them. What had begun as a professional alliance evolved into something deeper, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Mira saw in Elijah the brilliant mind her father might have been if given the chance. Elijah found in Mira the determination and integrity he'd once believed the engineering world lacked. One evening, as they were testing a new configuration, Mira suddenly opened up about her family. "My father designed an efficient cooling system for industrial equipment when I was a child," she said, adjusting a component with careful precision. His supervisor took the design, made minor changes, and patented it. The company made millions. "What did your father do?" Elijah asked. "Nothing. He was an immigrant on a work visa. Fighting meant risking everything." She looked up, her eyes meeting Elijah's. "He told me to accept that this is how the world works. I've spent my career trying to prove him wrong." Elijah nodded, understanding the weight she carried. "My mother used to say that talent finds a way, that cream rises to the top." She believed that so completely. "What would she think now?" Mira asked gently. Elijah was quiet for a moment. "She'd be disappointed, not in me, but in a system that makes talent irrelevant when it comes from the wrong person." He adjusted, a setting on their prototype. "But she'd also say it's never too late to stand up." Their moment of connection was interrupted by a crash from the hallway. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. No one was supposed to be in this building, especially not at night. Elijah moved silently to the door, easing it open to peek outside. The hallway was empty, but a storage cabinet had been toppled. "Accident or warning?" "We need to go," he whispered, returning to Mira. "Someone knows we're here." They quickly packed their essential equipment, leaving the heavier items behind. As they slipped out a rear exit, Elijah caught a glimpse of movement. A security guard making rounds, or someone sent to investigate. The next day, when Mira arrived, at work, she found her workstation in disarray. Nothing overtly damaged, but clearly searched. Her personal tablet was missing, and when she tried to log into her work computer, her credentials had been revoked. "System maintenance," the IT technician explained when she called. "Should be back up by tomorrow." But Mira knew better. They were onto her, cutting off her access to prevent further investigation. Without access to her files, she couldn't continue, gathering evidence against Weller. When she tried to enter Test Lab B, her keycard was denied. Dr. Haldane happened to be passing by as she stood frustrated at the door. "Problem, Mira?" he asked with false concern. "My card isn't working," she replied evenly. "Ah, yes. Security protocols have been tightened. Only senior staff have unrestricted access now." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps speak with Hajar. I'm sure it's just an oversight." As Haldane walked away, Mira noticed Ian watching their interaction from across the hall, his expression unreadable. She'd always gotten along with Ian, but lately, he'd been distant, always seeming to appear. Whenever she was accessing sensitive information, the pieces suddenly clicked into place. Ian was the spy, the one reporting her activities to management. That evening, Elijah made a bold move. Using his delivery credentials, he entered Virex's main server room during a shift change when security was lightest. With a small device Mira had programmed, he connected to the central system and began copying financial records, email exchanges between Weller and Lawrence, and patent documents, everything they needed to prove the conspiracy. What he found went beyond what they'd suspected. Not only had Weller and Lawrence conspired to steal his propulsion design, but they'd established a pattern of acquiring innovations from vulnerable students and researchers, using shell companies to hide the paper trail. Elijah's design wasn't the first they'd stolen, but it was the most valuable, the one they'd built their reputation on, and now that it was failing, they were desperate to make it work. As he finished downloading the files, Elijah heard footsteps approaching. He disconnected his device and slipped into a supply closet just as a security guard passed by. Once the coast was clear, he made his way out of the building, the evidence safely stored in his pocket. What he didn't know was that the server access had triggered a silent alarm. Within hours, Weller knew exactly what had been accessed and when. Security footage showed Elijah entering and leaving the server room. The next morning, Mira was called to a meeting with HR, where she was informed that she was being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into potential corporate espionage. What investigation? What evidence? She demanded. The HR director, a thin woman with a perpetually nervous expression, avoided eye contact. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details. Please clean out your desk and surrender your company ID. As security escorted her from the building, Mira saw Ian watching from a doorway. Their eyes met and he quickly looked away, guilt written across his face. Outside, she called Elijah immediately. They've suspended me. They know. I got the files, Elijah replied. Everything we need. Meet me at the coffee shop in 20 minutes. When they met, Elijah handed her a copy of the data. It's worse than we thought. Weller's been doing this for years, finding vulnerable students with promising ideas, using professors like Lawrence to steal their work, then burying the original creators so deeply they can never prove what happened. Mira scrolled through the files, her expression darkening. This is systematic exploitation. And look at these names. Almost all from marginalized backgrounds. Students who couldn't fight back. People no one would believe over respected professors and executives, Elijah agreed bitterly. As they discussed their next steps, neither noticed the black SUV parked across the street, its occupants photographing their meeting. Online, the story of the delivery genius had reached fever pitch. Tech forums were filled with speculation about Elijah's identity, with some users connecting dots to his time at MIT, the narrative of a brilliant black engineer whose work was stolen, who then became a delivery driver only to return and fix what the real engineers couldn't, had captured the public's imagination. A tech journalist named Samantha Reed had been particularly persistent, publishing a series of articles examining Virex's patent history and raising questions about the original source of their propulsion technology. Her latest piece directly named Elijah Boone as the likely creator of the system Virex had claimed as their own. The public pressure was building, forcing Virex's board of directors to take notice. Several members contacted Weller with concerns about potential fallout if the allegations proved true. Weller, feeling the walls closing in, decided to take direct action. He arranged a private meeting with Elijah, away from Virex facilities where they might be observed. The meeting took place in an upscale restaurant's private dining room. Elijah arrived to find Weller alone, sipping expensive scotch. "Mr. Boone," Weller greeted him with forced cordiality. "Thank you for coming." Elijah took a seat across from him, his expression neutral. "You didn't leave me much choice." Weller smiled thinly. "Choices are what I want to discuss, actually." He slid a folder across the table. Inside, you'll find a settlement agreement. $5 million, deposited to an account of your choosing. In exchange, you sign an NDA and disappear from Virex in this entire situation. Elijah didn't touch the folder. "And if I refuse?" Weller's smile hardened. "Then I'll have you arrested for corporate espionage. We have footage of you accessing our servers without authorization. That's a federal offense." "So is fraud," Elijah countered, "and theft of intellectual property, and falsifying patent applications. Allegations without proof," Weller dismissed. "I have an army of lawyers and friends in high places." "What do you have, Mr. Boone?" "A delivery van and a junior engineer who's already been terminated for theft of company property." "They fired Mira?" Elijah asked, his calm facade cracking slightly. "This morning. She'll be lucky if she works in engineering again." Weller leaned forward. "Take the money, Elijah. Walk away. We both know how this ends otherwise." Elijah stared at the man who had orchestrated the theft of his future 8 years ago. The anger he felt was cold and clear, nothing like the hot rage that had consumed him when he first discovered Lawrence's betrayal. "You know," Elijah said quietly, "for years I blamed myself for walking away, for giving up. I thought I lacked something. Courage, resilience, whatever it takes to fight back against people like you." He stood, leaving the folder untouched. "But I understand now. I didn't lack courage. I just hadn't found something worth fighting for yet." As he turned to leave, Weller called after him, "You're making a mistake, Boone. I'm offering you a way out." Elijah paused at the door. No, Mr. Weller. I'm finding my way back in. That night, Elijah found Mira waiting outside his apartment building. Her eyes were red from crying, but her expression was resolute. They took everything, she said. My access, my job, my reputation. Elijah nodded. Weller offered me $5 million to disappear. Are you going to take it? She asked, her voice small. No. He looked at her steadily. If I leave now, they rewrite history again. Mira smiled through her tears. So what's the plan? Tomorrow, Elijah said. I'm going to make my usual delivery to Virex, in uniform, on schedule. And then, a slow smile spread across his face. And then I'm going to show them exactly what just the delivery guy can do. Morning light streamed through the windows of Virex Dynamics as employees hurried to their workstations. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Rumors of Mira's firing and speculation about the viral delivery genius had spread throughout the company. In the main engineering lab, Dr. Haldane barked orders at his team as they prepared for another critical test of the propulsion system. This time it has to work, he snapped, wiping sweat from his brow. Weller's bringing board members to observe. Failure is not an option. In his office upstairs, Augustus Weller greeted 3 somber-faced board members, forcing confidence into his voice. I assure you, the prototype is back on schedule. Today's demonstration will prove it. Barbara Chen, the most senior board member, fixed Weller with a penetrating stare. The online speculation about a delivery driver understanding our technology better than our engineers is concerning, Augustus. The last thing we need is a public relations disaster on top of potential contract failures. Mere internet rumors, Weller dismissed with a wave of his hand. Today's successful test will put all that to rest. What none of them knew was that Elijah Boone was already in the building. He had arrived for his usual morning delivery, wearing his standard uniform, but carrying something extraordinary in addition to his usual packages, a small, hard-sided case containing his and Mira's working miniature prototype. As Elijah moved through the hallways, he noticed engineers watching him with newfound curiosity. Word had spread, the whispers, the quick glances, the sudden silence when he entered rooms. They knew who he might be, what he might have done. Some regarded him with skepticism, others with barely concealed interest. A junior engineer named Sarah Taylor even gave him a subtle nod of acknowledgement as he passed. The gesture wasn't lost on Elijah, small signs of recognition from those who had begun questioning the official narrative. When Elijah reached the main lab, instead of leaving, his packages at the door as usual, he walked straight in. The room fell silent, dozens of eyes turning to watch his entrance. Dr. Haldane looked up from the prototype, his face darkening. What are you doing? Deliveries go through receiving, he snapped. Elijah set down his official packages and held up the hard case. I have something else to deliver today, Dr. Haldane, something I think everyone here should see. Before Haldane could respond, the doors at the far end of the lab opened, and Augustus Weller entered with the board members. He stopped short when he saw Elijah, his confident expression faltering momentarily before he regained his composure. Mr. Boone, Weller said, his voice tightly controlled. This is a restricted area during testing. I'll have to ask you to leave. Elijah stood his ground. I think the board members might want to see what I've brought. He looked directly at Barbara Chen. Especially given the questions about Virex's propulsion technology that have been circulating online. Chen's eyebrows rose with interest. What exactly have you brought, Mr. Boone? Haldane stepped forward. This is absurd. He's just a delivery driver trying to capitalize on internet rumors. Am I? Elijah asked quietly. He set the case on a workbench and opened it, revealing a small but elegantly designed propulsion model. This is the original design I created at MIT 8 years ago, the same design that somehow became Virex's flagship technology after Professor Lawrence mysteriously acquired the patent. The lab erupted in murmurs. Weller's face flushed with anger. This is corporate espionage, security. Wait, Barbara Chen commanded, her authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. She approached Elijah's model, studying it with expert eyes. Let him explain. Elijah nodded his thanks. What I'm proposing is simple. A live demonstration. Run your current prototype alongside my model. Same parameters, same test conditions. Let's see which one works. A board member named James Wilcox frowned. That's hardly fair. Your small model versus our full-scale prototype? The principles are the same regardless of scale, Elijah replied confidently. If anything, larger systems are easier to stabilize, not harder. This is outrageous, Weller interrupted, stepping between Elijah and the board members. We can't allow an unauthorized person to disrupt official testing. Today's demonstration is critical for our federal contracts. Barbara Chen studied Weller, then looked back at Elijah. Something in her expression shifted. A calculation being made, a decision reached. Actually, I think this is exactly what we need to see. She turned to Weller. If our technology is superior and legitimate as you claim, then this should pose no challenge, unless there's something you're concerned about? Trapped by her logic, Weller could only step aside, his jaw clenched in barely controlled fury. Prepare both systems for testing, Chen instructed the engineering team. Same parameters, simultaneous runs. As the engineers scrambled to comply, setting up Elijah's model beside their struggling prototype, the atmosphere in the lab transformed. The younger engineers moved with a new energy, excited by the unprecedented challenge. Some senior engineers, loyal to Haldane, worked reluctantly, certain the delivery driver would be humiliated. Dr. Haldane hovered over the preparations, interjecting with criticisms. The testing protocols are designed for our system, not this toy. The principles are universal, Elijah replied calmly as he calibrated his model. If your system works, mine should fail under the same conditions, and vice versa. From the back of the lab, Ian, the engineer who had spied on Mira, watched with conflicted emotions. His loyalty to Virex warred with his growing unease about Weller's methods. As final preparations were completed, a crowd had gathered. Word had spread throughout the building about the showdown in the main lab. Even administrative staff had found excuses to be present, standing around the edges of the room, watching with anticipation. Both systems are ready, announced the lead. Test engineer Barbara Chen nodded. Begin the test sequence. The two propulsion systems powered up simultaneously. Immediately, warning lights flashed on Virex's prototype as it struggled to maintain stability. Engineers rushed to make adjustments, but the oscillation patterns only worsened. Meanwhile, Elijah's model hummed quietly, its energy field perfectly balanced, thrust vectors aligned exactly as specified. It rose from the testing platform and hovered, rock steady, exactly as designed. The contrast couldn't have been more dramatic, Virex's full-scale prototype shuddering with instability, while the small model performed flawlessly. After 3 minutes, Virex's system automatically shut down due to critical instability. Elijah's continued running perfectly. The silence in the lab was absolute. Then Barbara Chen spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. This is yours?" she asked Elijah. "Your original design?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, designed during my time at MIT, before Professor Lawrence claimed it as his own and sold the patent to Virex." Weller stepped forward. "These are serious allegations without proof. Anyone can build a small model that works under controlled conditions." "I have proof," came a voice from the doorway. Mira stood there, tablet in hand. Financial records showing payments from Weller to Lawrence dating back to when Elijah was still his student. Patent applications with timestamps proving Elijah's work predated Lawrence's claim. Email exchanges discussing how to acquire Elijah's design while ensuring he couldn't prove ownership. She walked into the lab, connecting her tablet to the main display screen. "And I'm not the only one who knows. A journalist named Samantha Reed received these documents this morning. They're being published as we speak." As if on cue, phones throughout the lab began buzzing with notifications. The story was breaking online, complete with video from the lab test that someone had been live-streaming to a tech forum. Within minutes, the footage of Elijah's successful demonstration alongside Virex's failing prototype was trending globally under the hashtag #DeliveryGenius. Barbara Chen turned to Weller, her expression stone-cold. "Augustus, you and Dr. Haldane are relieved of duties pending a full investigation. Security will escort you both from the building." As security officers approached, Weller's composure finally shattered. "You can't do this. This company exists. Because of me. Without my connections, my influence. Without stolen innovation," Elijah interrupted quietly. "You have nothing." The board members huddled together in urgent discussion as Weller and Haldane were escorted out. Meanwhile, engineers gathered around Elijah's model, examining it with newfound respect and asking technical questions that he answered with the confidence of someone who truly understood the technology from its foundation. After the board finished their discussion, Barbara Chen approached Elijah. "Mr. Boone, Virex would like to offer you a consulting contract to help correct the issues with our prototype, with full credit for your original design, of course, and appropriate compensation." Elijah looked around the lab, at the engineers waiting for his response, at Mira's encouraging smile, at his small but perfect creation hovering steadily on the test platform. For a moment, he saw himself as he might have been, working in a place like this, his innovations recognized and celebrated. Then he thought of all the others like him, whose ideas had been stolen, whose potential had been buried, whose names had been erased from their own creations. "I appreciate the offer," he said finally, "but I'm not done yet. This isn't just about fixing your prototype or getting credit for my design. This is about full transparency, about all the innovations Weller and Lawrence stole from all the students they exploited." Chen frowned. "That would require a much broader investigation." "Yes," Elijah agreed, "it would." As the crowd in the lab dispersed, Elijah and Mira carefully packed up their prototype. They had won this battle, but both knew the war was far from over. Weller had powerful friends, and systems of privilege didn't change overnight. Outside, in the parking lot, they shared a moment of victory, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. "You did it," Mira said, grinning. "You stood up and took back what was yours." Elijah shook his head. "We did it. I wouldn't be here without you." As they loaded the prototype into Elijah's van, neither noticed the black government sedan pulling into the lot, nor the two men in suits watching them with determined expressions. The men approached as Elijah closed the van's rear doors. "Elijah Boone?" one asked, flashing a federal badge. "Yes," Elijah replied, instantly wary. "You're under arrest for unauthorized access to classified technology and corporate espionage. You have the right to remain silent." As the agents handcuffed him, Elijah caught Mira's horrified expression. "Call Samantha Reed," he told her urgently. "Make sure the story stays alive." Mira watched helplessly as they placed Elijah in the back of the sedan and drove away, taking him from the scene of his triumph straight into a nightmare. The federal detention facility was cold and impersonal, its gray walls and harsh lighting designed to break the spirit. Elijah sat alone in an interrogation room, hands folded calmly on the metal table despite the storm of emotions inside him. For 8 hours, they had questioned him relentlessly about hacking Virex's servers, about accessing protected military technology, about his relationship with Mira and their conspiracy to steal proprietary information. The interrogation felt coordinated, as if someone had prepared them specifically to target him. "You don't seem to understand the seriousness of these charges, Mr. Boone," said Agent Harper, the lead investigator, his voice weary after hours of questioning. "We're talking about potential violations of the National Security Act. You could face decades in prison." Elijah maintained his composure. "The technology you're referring to was my creation, designed when I was a student at MIT. It was stolen from me and improperly classified to hide that theft." Harper sighed. "That's for the courts to decide. For now, you'll remain in custody." As Elijah was led back to his holding cell, he wondered how Weller had managed to arrange this so quickly. The answer came the next morning when he was brought back for more questioning. On a news channel playing in the corner of the room, he caught a glimpse of Senator Howard Blake holding a press conference about security breaches at critical aerospace contractors. Blake, the same senator whose campaign had received substantial donations from Augustus Weller over the years. The connection was clear. Weller had called in a political favor to silence Elijah quickly and discredit him publicly. Outside the detention facility, however, Events were unfolding beyond Weller's control. Mira had immediately contacted Samantha Reed, the journalist, who had been investigating Virex. Within hours, the story of Elijah's arrest had been published alongside detailed evidence of Virex's patent theft and Weller's connections to Senator Blake. The public reaction was swift and powerful. Social media exploded with outrage as people connected the dots. A brilliant black engineer whose work was stolen, who proved his genius by fixing what the thieves couldn't, only to be arrested on dubious charges when he reclaimed what was rightfully his. Protesters gathered outside Virex headquarters, holding signs with slogans like "Free Elijah Boone" and "Justice for the Delivery Genius." Online petitions demanding his release gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures in days. Inside Virex, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. With Weller and Haldane suspended pending investigation, younger engineers began speaking up about other instances of stolen innovation and suppressed ideas. A group led by Sarah Taylor, the junior engineer who had nodded to Elijah, organized to document these cases and present them to the board. Mira, though banned from Virex property, worked tirelessly from outside, coordinating with these internal allies and collecting testimonies from former employees and students who had similar experiences with Lawrence and other professors in Weller's network. The turning point came 4 days into Elijah's detention, when an elderly man named Dr. Martin Sullivan requested a meeting with Samantha Reed. Sullivan had been a professor at MIT when Elijah was a student, though not directly involved with his work. "I've carried this guilt for too long," Sullivan told Reed, his hands trembling slightly as he passed her a folder of documents. "I knew what Lawrence was doing, not just to Elijah Boone, but to other promising students from underrepresented backgrounds. Their ideas were systematically harvested and redirected to connected industries through patents held by faculty." Sullivan's testimony, backed by documents he had secretly preserved, provided the smoking gun. Evidence of a pattern of exploitation that couldn't be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. When Reed published Sullivan's account, the pressure intensified. Virex's stock plummeted, and investors began demanding action from the board. Barbara Chen called an emergency meeting where they voted unanimously to sever all ties with Augustus Weller and cooperate fully with any investigation into patent irregularities. "The company's survival depends on demonstrating that we won't tolerate these practices," Chen told the other board members. "We need to make this right." With Virex officially distancing itself from Weller, his political protection began to crumble. Senator Blake suddenly became unavailable for comment on the case, and other politicians who had received Weller's donations hastily issued statements supporting a full investigation into the allegations. Meanwhile, Mira took a bold step of her own. She managed to track down Weller at his country club, where he was attempting to maintain a facade of normalcy despite his world collapsing around him. She approached his table during lunch, ignoring the maitre d' who tried to intercept. "Ms. Taleb," Weller said coldly when he saw her. "You're making a scene." "Better a scene than a cover-up," Mira replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I just came to deliver a message. You built this empire on lies, and now it's crumbling." Weller's composed expression slipped, revealing the rage beneath. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, little girl. I still have friends in places you can't imagine. So does Elijah," Mira countered. "They're just different places. Newsrooms, social media, the streets, places where the truth matters more than connections." As security escorted her out, Mira felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced the man who had tried to destroy her career and spoken her truth directly to him. Whatever happened next, she would have no regrets. What happened next exceeded even her expectations. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, the real FBI, not the agents who had arrested Elijah, opened an inquiry into the circumstances of his detention. When they discovered that the arresting agents had acted on orders from Senator Blake without proper authorization or evidence, they intervened. Just 5 days after his arrest, Elijah was released. The official statement cited insufficient evidence and procedural irregularities, but everyone understood the truth. His detention had been a political favor, not legitimate law enforcement. As Elijah walked out of the detention facility, he was stunned to find hundreds of people waiting, protesters with signs, journalists with cameras, and in the front, Mira, her face radiant with triumph. Cameras flashed as he blinked in the bright sunlight. Someone thrust a microphone toward him, asking for a statement. For a moment, Elijah was overwhelmed. Then he simply said, "The truth can be buried, but it grows in the dark. Today it reached the light." The crowd erupted in cheers. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the scene live across the country. Elijah had entered Virex as just the delivery guy. Now he emerged as a symbol of innovation reclaimed, of justice delayed, but not denied. That evening, after the cameras had gone and the crowds dispersed, Elijah drove to the cemetery where his mother was buried. The quiet there was a balm after the chaos of the past days. He knelt beside her grave, touching the cool stone gently. "They tried to bury me, Mom," he whispered, "but they didn't know I was a seed." In the soft twilight, he could almost hear her response, the wisdom she'd tried to instill in him since childhood. That talent finds a way. That cream rises to the top. She had been right after all, though the path had been longer and harder than either of them could have imagined. As Elijah drove home, his phone buzzed with messages, job offers from tech companies, interview requests from major networks, congratulations from strangers who had followed his story. But the message that mattered most was from Mira. "What next, genius?" For the first time in 8 years, Elijah found himself smiling at the word. What next indeed? With his reputation restored and his innovation recognized, the possibilities stretched before him like an open road. Meanwhile, in separate developments, federal investigators had opened formal inquiries into both Augustus Weller and Senator Blake. The conspiracy that had begun with stolen student work had expanded into financial irregularities, misuse of government contracts, and apparent bribery of public officials. Lawrence, seeing the writing on the wall, had already reached out to prosecutors, offering testimony against Weller in exchange for leniency. The professor who had once smugly told Elijah, "It's your word against mine," was now scrambling to save himself by betraying his co-conspirator. The reckoning had begun, not just for the theft of Elijah's work, but for a system that had allowed powerful men to build careers and fortunes by exploiting the innovations of those with less power and privilege. And at the center of it all stood Elijah Boone, no longer hiding his light, no longer just the delivery guy. He had delivered something far more valuable than packages: truth, justice, and hope for others like him, whose voices had been silenced and whose brilliance had been buried. The seed had grown. The truth had reached the light, and nothing would ever be the same. The Global Technology Summit was normally reserved for industry titans and established innovators. Yet this year, its most anticipated speaker was a man who, just weeks earlier, had been delivering packages to those same titans. The main hall was packed beyond capacity, with attendees spilling into overflow rooms where screens displayed the stage. Elijah stood in the wings, adjusting his tie. Not a delivery uniform this time, but not quite a typical executive suit either. He'd chosen something that reflected his journey, professional but unpretentious, a subtle reminder of where he'd come from. 2 minutes, Mr. Boone, a staff member informed him. Mira appeared at his side, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Ready to make history again?" Elijah took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." When his name was announced, the audience erupted in applause before he'd even taken the stage. Camera flashes lit up the darkened hall as he approached the podium, the spotlight following his confident stride. For a moment, he simply looked out at the crowd, CEOs, engineers, investors, and journalists, all waiting to hear what the delivery genius would say. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Thank you for that welcome," Elijah began, his voice steady and clear. "For those who don't know me, my name is Elijah Boone. Until recently, I was just the delivery guy, and they never saw me coming." A wave of laughter and applause washed through the audience. But my story isn't unique, he continued, his tone growing more serious. Every day, brilliant ideas are overlooked because of who presents them. Innovation doesn't care about your title, your background, or the color of your skin. But too often, the gatekeepers of opportunity do. Over the next 30 minutes, Elijah shared his journey, from his early passion for engineering to the theft of his work, from his years of quiet resignation to his recent vindication. He didn't name Weller or Lawrence directly. He didn't need them. Their downfall had been playing out in the headlines for weeks. The question I've been asked most often is, "What's next for Elijah Boone?" he said as he approached the conclusion of his speech. Today I'm ready to answer that question. The room fell silent in anticipation. I've received generous offers from many companies represented in this room, Elijah acknowledged with a nod. And I'm grateful for that recognition, but I didn't fight to reclaim my work just to hand it over to a new set of gatekeepers. He paused, looking toward Mira at the side of the stage. Today I'm announcing the formation of Boone Dynamics, a company focused on ethical propulsion technology. Yes, but also on something more fundamental, creating pathways for overlooked innovators, particularly from marginalized communities. The announcement triggered a fresh round of applause, but Elijah wasn't finished. And I'm honored to introduce my co-founder and chief technology officer, Mira Talib, the engineer who believed in me when no one else would. Mira joined him on stage, beaming as the audience applauded. Together, they outlined their vision, not just developing cutting-edge technology, but establishing mentorship programs and educational initiatives to ensure that the next generation of innovators wouldn't face the same barriers they had. As they left the stage to a standing ovation, reporters clamored for additional comments, but the most meaningful response came from a young engineering student who had waited patiently at the edge of the crowd. "Mr. Boone," she said when she finally reached him, "your story changed how I see my future. I almost quit last semester, after a professor dismissed my thesis proposal. Now I'm fighting for it." Elijah smiled, recognizing in her the same determination he'd once had and had found again. "What's your name?" "Zoe Williams." "Well, Zoe Williams, Boone Dynamics will be watching your career with great interest." In the weeks that followed, Elijah and Mira worked tirelessly to establish their company. With Elijah's newfound fame and the vindication of his technology, securing funding was surprisingly easy. Investors were eager to be associated with the delivery genius whose story had captured the public imagination. They leased a modest facility on the outskirts of the city, nothing like Virex's gleaming corporate campus, but perfect for their needs. Their first hire wasn't an experienced engineer, but a gifted 16-year-old named Marcus Jenkins, who had been building homemade propulsion models in his family's garage. "His designs are raw but innovative," Mira explained as she showed Elijah the teenager's work. "Reminds me of someone else I know." Elijah studied the rough sketches and crude prototypes, recognizing the spark of genuine talent. "Let's bring him in, not as an intern, as a junior developer. Full salary, flexible hours so he can finish school." Marcus became the first of many unconventional hires as Boone Dynamics grew rapidly, attracting talent that traditional companies had overlooked: self-taught engineers without formal degrees, immigrant scientists whose credentials weren't recognized in America, brilliant minds who didn't fit the standard corporate mold. Meanwhile, Virex Dynamics was struggling. The scandal surrounding Weller and the revelation that their flagship technology had been stolen had devastating effects. Government agencies suspended contracts pending review, and several board members resigned amid the growing controversy. Barbara Chen, now acting CEO, was fighting to save the company's reputation. She reached out to Elijah with a proposal: a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, full financial restitution, and a partnership moving forward. "Your name on our rehabilitated brand would go a long way toward rebuilding trust," she explained during their meeting. Elijah considered the offer carefully before declining. "I appreciate the gesture, Ms. Chen, but Virex needs to rebuild on its own terms. Our companies can collaborate on specific projects, but Boone Dynamics will remain independent." As Elijah's profile rose in the tech world, so did the demands on his time. Interview requests poured in. as did speaking invitations and opportunities to advise on technology policy. He accepted selectively, always prioritizing appearances that allowed him to advocate for systemic change in how innovation was recognized and rewarded. One such opportunity came in the form of a TED Talk invitation. Standing on the famous red dot, Elijah captivated the audience with his story and his vision for a more inclusive tech industry. The video went viral, accumulating millions of views within days. Augustus Weller watched that video from a very different setting, a prison recreation room surrounded by other white-collar criminals. Federal prosecutors had built an airtight case against him, resulting in convictions for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. His empire had crumbled, his wealth seized, his name now synonymous with corporate corruption. As Weller watched, Elijah articulate a vision for the future of technology. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. The man he had dismissed as just a delivery guy was now shaping the industry Weller had once dominated. Back at MIT, the administration was scrambling to address its role in the scandal. Several professors associated with Lawrence had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and the patent office was reviewing dozens of potentially fraudulent applications. The university invited Elijah to receive an honorary doctorate, a gesture meant to symbolize reconciliation and acknowledgement of past wrongs. To everyone's surprise, Elijah refused the degree. Instead, he proposed, establish a scholarship, in my mother's name, Elijah Boone, for students from underrepresented backgrounds with promising innovations. That would be a more meaningful legacy than any title you could give me. The Elijah Boone Innovation Scholarship was announced the following semester, with Elijah serving on the selection committee to ensure it fulfilled its intended purpose. As Boone Dynamics continued to grow, Elijah remained grounded in his purpose. He maintained a hands-on role in their technology development, often working directly with young engineers like Marcus to refine their ideas. The company culture reflected his values, collaborative rather than competitive, focused on innovation rather than hierarchy. One evening, after most employees had gone home, Elijah received an unexpected visitor. His brother Michael, whom he hadn't seen in nearly 5 years, was waiting in the reception area. "Eli," Michael said, standing awkwardly as Elijah emerged from his office. "I saw you on TV. Thought maybe it was time to reconnect." The brothers had drifted apart after their mother's death. Michael had gone into engineering as well, but had given up after facing similar barriers to recognition, turning instead to construction work that paid the bills, but left his potential untapped. "It's good to see you, Mike," Elijah said, embracing his brother. "I've been meaning to reach out, but things have been busy," Michael finished with a small smile. "I bet they have. Delivery guy to tech CEO in a month, that's quite a promotion." As they caught up over dinner, Elijah could see the same lost spark in Michael that he had carried for years, the resignation of a brilliant mind that had accepted defeat. By the end of the night, he had offered his brother a position at Boone Dynamics. "Not because you're my brother," Elijah clarified, "but because you're exactly the kind of engineer we need, someone who understands both theoretical innovation and practical application." Michael hesitated, then accepted with a nod. "Mom would be proud, you know, of both of us now." Later that week, Elijah and Mira stood on the rooftop of their company building, looking out at the city skyline as sunset painted the clouds in brilliant hues of orange and pink. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at Virex, and their lives had transformed completely. "Did you ever imagine this?" Elijah asked, gesturing at the expanding campus below, where their team of 50 employees was developing technology that would revolutionize aerospace propulsion. Mira smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "I always knew you were brilliant. I just didn't know how far we'd go." "We," Elijah repeated, emphasizing the word. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." "Neither could I," Mira acknowledged. "I always believed in your vision, but I needed your courage to stand up against a system that was designed to keep both of us in our place." As they stood in comfortable silence, watching darkness settle over the city, Elijah felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had reclaimed not just his work, but his purpose, and in doing so, had begun to change the very system that had once rejected him. 5 years passed in a blur of growth and innovation. Boone Dynamics had evolved from a promising startup into a global leader in propulsion technology, with offices in 3 countries and over 400 employees. Their designs had revolutionized everything from commercial aircraft to space exploration vehicles, earning industry awards and government contracts based on merit rather than connections. Elijah, now 40, had grown into his role as a visionary leader. His delivery uniform was preserved in a simple frame in his office, a reminder of where he'd come from and how easily talent could be overlooked based on appearances. On this particular morning, he stood addressing a group of high school students, touring the Boone Dynamics campus, participants in the nationwide mentorship program that now bore his name. The most valuable asset in any industry isn't equipment or capital, he told them, moving among the eager young faces. It's perspective, the unique way each of you sees problems and imagines solutions. The Elijah Boone STEM mentorship program had expanded to 50 cities across the country, providing resources and guidance to young people from underrepresented communities. Many of its graduates had gone on to prestigious universities or directly into innovative roles at companies that had learned the value of diverse talent. After the tour concluded, Elijah returned to his office to find an application on his desk. The name on the cover letter made him pause. Ian Parker, the engineer who had once spied on Mira for Augustus Weller. Attached was a handwritten note. I've spent years regretting my role in what happened at Virex. I understand if this application goes directly to the trash, but I hope you'll consider it. I've learned difficult lessons about integrity and courage. Elijah studied the application thoughtfully. Ian had spent the past few years at a smaller engineering firm, his career stalled by his association with the Virex scandal. His technical qualifications were solid, but his moral failings had defined his professional reputation. After some consideration, Elijah wrote a note on the application. Provisional approval, 6-month probation, assigned to Michael Boone's team. Everyone deserved a second chance, but trust would need to be earned. Later that day, Elijah attended a screening of Just the Delivery Guy, The Elijah Boone Story, a documentary produced by a major streaming platform. The film chronicled his journey from MIT student to delivery driver to technological innovator, placing his personal story in the context of broader systemic barriers to recognition. The screening room was filled with Boone Dynamics employees, family members, and selected media. Elijah watched somewhat uncomfortably as his life played out on screen. The pain of his mother's death, the theft of his work, the years of quiet resignation, and finally, his dramatic reclamation of his legacy. When the credits rolled, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Elijah acknowledged their applause with a humble nod, then invited Marcus Jenkins, now 21 and a senior developer at Boone Dynamics, to join him at the front of the room. 5 years ago, Marcus was building propulsion models in his garage. With no clear path to turn his brilliance into opportunity, Elijah announced. Today, he's filed his own propulsion patent, with Boone Dynamics as the assignee but his name prominently as the inventor. Marcus beamed as Elijah held up the patent certificate. This is what we're building. Not just technology, but a legacy of recognition where brilliance is valued regardless of its source. The following week brought another milestone. During a development meeting for their newest project, Elijah observed a junior engineer named Taylor being dismissed by her supervisor when she proposed an unorthodox approach to a persistent problem. I've heard that before, Elijah interrupted, stepping forward. Let's hear her idea. The room fell silent as Taylor hesitantly explained her concept, a novel approach to phase alignment that challenged conventional thinking but offered potentially significant efficiency gains. Her supervisor looked skeptical. That's completely untested. We can't waste resources on. That's exactly what we should be testing, Elijah countered. Innovation doesn't come from following established patterns. He turned to Taylor. Develop a proposal. You'll lead a small team to explore this approach. The moment reminded him powerfully of his own experience. How different things might have been if someone in authority had said those words to him 8 years ago. In a strange twist of fate, Virex Dynamics, now, under entirely new leadership following its near collapse, approached Boone Dynamics with a licensing proposal. They wanted to incorporate Elijah's propulsion technology into their next generation of aerospace systems, with full attribution and substantial royalties. Ironic, isn't it? Michael commented when Elijah shared the proposal. They're coming to us for permission to use what they once stole. Elijah signed the agreement the next day. The goal had never been to destroy Virex, but to create a system where innovation was properly recognized and rewarded. This licensing deal represented a small but significant step toward that vision. As Boone Dynamics celebrated its 5th anniversary, Elijah received an unexpected request for a meeting from Professor Lawrence. The man who had stolen his work was a shadow of his former self, disgraced, unemployable in academia, and serving probation for his role in the patent fraud scheme. Elijah agreed to meet him at a small coffee shop near the Boone Dynamics campus. Lawrence arrived looking aged beyond his years, his once confident posture now stooped with defeat. "Thank you for seeing me," Lawrence began, his voice subdued. "I know I don't deserve your time." "Why did you want to meet?" Elijah asked directly. Lawrence stared into his coffee cup. "I wanted to apologize, though I know that's inadequate. And..." He hesitated. "I wanted to ask if there's any way I could contribute to your mentorship program, not as an engineer or advisor, but perhaps sharing my story as a cautionary tale." Elijah studied the man who had once held such power over his future. "You don't owe me an apology, Professor. You owe them a future. Them? The students whose ideas you buried, the innovations you stifled, the careers you derailed." Elijah leaned forward. "If you're serious about making amends, start by helping us identify every student whose work was misappropriated under your watch. Help us make it right." Lawrence nodded slowly, the weight of his actions visibly heavy on his shoulders. "I'll provide everything I can." 2 weeks later, Elijah received a package in the mail, a time-worn envelope with his mother's handwriting. Inside was a letter she had written for a community time capsule, intended to be opened on the 10th anniversary of her death, which had just passed. Elijah sat alone in his office as he carefully unfolded the yellowed paper. "To my son Elijah, if you're reading this, it means I've been gone a decade. I hope you've found your way back to your purpose by now. Remember what I always told you, don't shrink yourself for small minds. The world needs your brilliance even when it doesn't know how to recognize it. Whatever path you've taken, know that I see you, not just what you do, but who you are. A gentle soul with a brilliant mind, my greatest creation. All my love, Mom." Tears blurred Elijah's vision as he carefully refolded the letter. Somehow, even years after her death, his mother had found a way to witness his journey home to himself. The next morning, Elijah walked through the bustling campus of Boone Dynamics, taking in the vibrant energy of their growing team. Engineers of all backgrounds collaborated in open workspaces, their differences in perspective creating stronger solutions than any homogeneous group could have achieved. In one lab, Marcus was mentoring a group of high school students from the STEM program, guiding them through the basics of propulsion design with the same patience Elijah had once shown him. In another, Michael was leading a team that included Ian Parker, who was working diligently to prove himself worthy of the second chance he'd been given, near the prototype testing area. Mira was deep in conversation with Taylor about her phase alignment breakthrough, which was showing promising results in initial tests. A young intern approached nervously, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Boone. Someone mentioned you used to be a delivery driver before all this. Is that really true?" Elijah smiled, looking out at the innovation unfolding around him, the legacy not just of his technology, but of his journey. "Yes," he replied. "I'm still a delivery guy. Just delivering bigger things now." As he continued his walk through the campus, Elijah's mother's words echoed in his mind. "Don't shrink yourself for small minds." He hadn't just reclaimed his own work, he had created space for countless others to stand in their full brilliance, to deliver their gifts to a world that needed them, and that, perhaps, was the most important delivery of all. Greatness isn't always in the title. Sometimes, it's in the delivery. Who among us has been overlooked while carrying the very solution others desperately seek? If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more tales of hidden brilliance finally brought to light.